Walter Grayson looked Evelyn Hartwell up and down. The way a man examines livestock he's decided isn't worth the feed. Slowly, without apology, without shame, and then he said the words right there on the platform where anyone could hear them. "You're too old. I can't use a woman like you." He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look away. He picked up his hat, adjusted the brim, and walked back toward the street as if he had simply declined a plate of food he hadn't ordered. Evelyn stood beside her single suitcase and did not move. The people on the platform stared. Some looked away quickly, the way people do when they've witnessed something ugly they don't want to carry home with them. Others kept watching because cruelty has always drawn a crowd. She was 56 years old. She had crossed half the continent on a promise. And now she was standing in a town she didn't know, with no one coming to help her. If you've ever been told you were too old, too late, or too far gone to deserve something good, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because what happens to Evelyn Hartwell in Red Hollow, Montana will remind you that life doesn't run on anyone else's schedule. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The train had been running 4 hours behind schedule, which meant Evelyn had spent most of the morning sitting in the last car watching Montana roll past the window like something out of a painting she had never been allowed to touch. The mountains were enormous. The sky was a particular shade of blue that didn't exist back east, the kind of blue that made a person feel small in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. She had told herself, somewhere around the third hour, that a sky like that was a good sign. She had been telling herself good signs for 3 weeks. The letter from Walter Grayson had arrived on a Tuesday in late October, addressed in careful, deliberate handwriting to the boarding house where she had been living since the bank took the farmhouse. She had read it 4 times before she let herself believe it was real. He was a rancher, he said, established and serious, looking for a woman of practical experience and steady character to share his home and his work. He used the word partner twice. He said age was no obstacle to a man who valued substance over appearance. He said he had grown tired of the kind of women who came west looking for adventure and left when the adventure turned out to be labor. Evelyn had written back the same evening. She had not pretended to be younger than she was. She had told him plainly, 56, widowed, no children living, experienced in managing a household, capable with livestock, not afraid of work or silence. She had sent the letter before she could talk herself out of it. His reply came in 9 days. He confirmed the arrangement. He told her to come. She had sold what little remained: a good coat, her mother's sewing box, 2 chairs she couldn't take on the train, and she had come. The platform at Red Hollow Station was smaller than she expected, a single long stretch of weathered boards running alongside the tracks, with a painted station house at one end and an open wagon yard at the other. It was cold. November had arrived early in Montana, and the wind came off the mountains with a particular intention, the kind that gets through wool and finds the bones. Evelyn stepped off the train with her suitcase in her right hand and a worn photograph tucked inside her coat pocket, her husband Edmund's face creased and soft from years of handling. And she stood on that platform and looked for a man who matched the description she'd been given. Tall, dark hat, rancher's build. There were several men who fit that description standing on the platform, and none of them were looking at her. She waited. The other passengers collected their things and moved on. The station agent disappeared inside. 2 younger women were met with embraces and laughter and loaded into wagons. A family of 4 crossed the yard without looking back. The platform emptied by degrees, the way rooms do after a party, until Evelyn was left standing alone with her suitcase and the cold and the sound of the horses shifting their weight in the wagon yard. She told herself he was delayed. She told herself the roads were rough this time of year. She told herself a great many things in the course of that first hour, and she stood up straight through all of them because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing a woman could do while waiting was look like she was waiting. He arrived at 11:15. She knew it was him before he spoke, not because he matched the description, but because of the way he walked, the careful, unhurried pace of a man who has decided something and is arriving to deliver it rather than discuss it. He was perhaps 40, which was younger than she'd imagined, with a face that had been handsome once and had hardened into something less than that. He stopped in front of her and looked her over the way she had seen men look at horses being offered at auction, measuring, calculating, searching for the defect that would justify the low bid. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. Not a question. "Mr. Grayson." She held out her hand. He didn't take it. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked past her, as if he were checking to see if perhaps there was another Mrs. Hartwell somewhere behind her who might be more to his liking. "You didn't mention your age," he said. "I mentioned it specifically," Evelyn said, "in both letters." "I meant—" He stopped, started again. "I thought you were being modest. Women do that. I thought maybe you meant you were 40, 45 at the outside." He said this without embarrassment. As a man states a clerical error, he expects to be corrected. Evelyn said nothing. She had a feeling, a cold, sinking feeling, like stepping through ice, of exactly where this conversation was going, and she was trying to decide whether she could stop it. She could not. "I'm going to be straight with you," Walter Grayson said, and raised his voice slightly, not on purpose exactly, but in the way men do when they want what they're saying to feel official. "I can't take you on. I need someone who can—" He paused, searching for a word that would make this clean. He didn't find one. "Someone younger. Someone who can give me a future, you understand." A woman at the edge of the platform, she had come to meet someone else, some piece of ordinary business, stopped walking. A man loading a crate across the yard put down the crate and watched. The station agent had reappeared in the doorway of the station house, and he was very carefully looking at the ground, which was the posture of a person who is listening. Walter picked up his hat from where he'd been holding it against his side and set it on his head. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he said, which was possibly the most dishonest thing he had said in a conversation full of dishonest things. "I'll pay for your ticket back east if you need it. Ask the station agent." Then he walked away. He walked away the same way he had arrived, unhurried, decided. And Evelyn watched him cross the wagon yard and climb into a buckboard and slap the reins against the horse's back and move off down the road without looking behind him once. She stood very still. This was the thing people would not understand later when they told the story. Evelyn Hartwell did not cry. Not because she wasn't hurt. She was hurt in a way that started somewhere behind her sternum and radiated outward until her hands were cold and her throat ached. But because crying required a level of privacy she didn't have. She was standing in front of strangers. She had been rejected publicly, like a piece of merchandise returned to sender, and the only thing she had left in that moment was her posture. She straightened her spine. She set her suitcase down beside her feet, and she stood there in the cold and breathed through it. The woman who had stopped at the platform edge said something to the man beside her, something low. Evelyn caught the word shame and the word age and let them pass through her the way the wind was passing through her coat. People were going to say what they were going to say. She had lived 56 years, and she knew that much at least. What she didn't know was what she was going to do next. The ticket back east would take her to— what exactly? The boarding house, where she was behind on 2 months of rent. Her sister's house in Pennsylvania, where she would sleep in the back room and accept the particular brand of sympathy that felt like slow humiliation. The life she had already survived once and had no desire to survive again. She was thinking about this, or trying to think about it, past the cold and the ache and the sound of blood moving in her ears, when someone said, "Enough." Not loudly, but in the way of a man who is accustomed to rooms going quiet when he speaks. She turned. He was standing at the entrance of the station house, and he was not what she would have called a handsome man, not in the conventional sense. He was too angular for that, too weathered, with a face that looked like it had been exposed to Montana weather for 40-odd years, and had simply accepted the consequences. He was tall, broader through the shoulder than Walter Grayson by a considerable measure, and he was looking at the crowd on the platform with an expression that communicated, without any particular drama, that he had seen what had just happened, and he found it beneath contempt. The crowd arranged itself accordingly. He crossed the platform. He didn't rush. He stopped in front of Evelyn, and he looked at her directly, which was notable because most of the people on that platform had been looking at the ground. "Silas Crow," he said. "Evelyn Hartwell," she said. "I know who you are," he said. I saw you get off the train. He paused. I saw what Grayson did. Then you know as much as anyone, she said. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable, just deliberate, the way a man is quiet when he's deciding whether to say the thing he's thinking. You crossed half this country because a man gave you his word, he said finally. That makes you brave, not foolish. Don't let anyone down here tell you different. She looked at him. She couldn't read him exactly. He wasn't the kind of face that opened easily, but she didn't think he was performing for the crowd. He wasn't speaking loudly. He wasn't making a show. Thank you, she said. That's... She stopped. Thank you. He nodded. Then he said, I've got a proposition for you, if you've got an ear for one. She waited. My ranch house has been running without a housekeeper for 2 years, he said. My wife passed. The house has gone to ruin, which I'll admit frankly because there's no point in pretending otherwise. The men I employ are cattle hands, not housekeepers, and they've done the best they can, which is not much. He looked at her steadily. I'm not offering marriage. I want to be clear about that. I'm offering a position. 3 months with pay and a room of your own and honest work if you want it. At the end of 3 months, you decide whether you want to stay on or go. No obligation either way. The people still lingering at the edge of the platform were listening. She knew that. She also knew that their listening didn't particularly matter. What makes you think I can do the work? She asked. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. You've been standing on this platform for the better part of an hour after being publicly humiliated by a man who doesn't deserve to polish your boots, he said. And you haven't cried, you haven't left, and you haven't said a single uncharitable word that I've heard. That tells me something about what you're made of. She considered this. She thought about the boarding house. She thought about Pennsylvania. She thought about the particular weight of a life lived entirely in other people's back rooms. All right, she said. 3 months. He picked up her suitcase before she could reach for it. She almost objected on principle and then decided it wasn't the moment for it. The wagon was a working wagon, not a fancy one. Scarred wood, a bench seat that had been repaired once and would probably need it again. A team of 2 horses that looked like they'd been chosen for endurance rather than appearance. Evelyn climbed up without assistance, which she suspected Silas noticed. They left Red Hollow Station heading west with the mountains in front of them and the town dropping away behind, and neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Silas said without looking at her, Have you eaten today? On the train, she said. This morning. That's not today, that's this morning, he said. She almost smiled. I'll manage until supper. There's biscuits in the saddlebag behind the seat, he said. Left from yesterday, but they're not bad. She found them. They were not bad. She ate too and watched the land open up around them, wide and cold and impossibly vast, the kind of country that doesn't care whether you're young or old or brave or frightened, the kind that simply continues. She had not been west before. She had not expected to find it beautiful. After another mile, Silas said, What kind of work did you do? Before. Ran a farm, she said. 12 years with my husband, 4 years after he passed. Chickens, some cattle, vegetable crops, managed the accounts, did the preserving and the cooking and most of the repairs that didn't require a man my husband's size. What happened to the farm? Bank, she said. 2 bad years in a row, then a third that looked good until the drought. She said it without inflection, the way you talk about things that are finished. It was his family's land, not mine. When he passed and the bank took it, there wasn't anything to contest. Silas drove in silence for a while. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be, she said. It was a while ago. I've had time to make peace with it. Have you? He asked. Not unkindly, just directly. She thought about it honestly, which was more than she'd done in some time. Mostly, she said. He nodded as though that was a satisfactory answer, and they didn't speak again until the ranch came into view. She had prepared herself for practical. She had not prepared herself for the particular kind of neglect that settles into a house when someone has stopped believing it matters. The main house was large, solidly built, the kind of structure that had been put together by someone with confidence and permanence. But the porch sagged on one side. The shutters on 2 windows were missing entirely. The yard between the house and the barn had accumulated 2 years of miscellaneous debris, broken tools, a wagon wheel that had been leaned against the fence and simply remained, a feed bucket that had rusted through, sitting in the same spot long enough to leave a ring in the dirt. The inside was worse. She stood in the front room while Silas set her suitcase down and watched her look around. She could feel him watching her. She kept her face neutral. The furniture was coated in a fine layer of grit. Someone had made an effort at some point. There were curtains, though they had faded to near colorlessness. But the effort had stopped somewhere in the middle and simply never resumed. The kitchen had a good stove and a pantry that contained enough supplies to suggest the men were eating, but the surfaces were dark with grease, and the floor hadn't been properly scrubbed in what she estimated was at least a year. "I told you," Silas said. "You did," she said. "If you want to leave—" "I'm not going to leave," she said. "I'm going to start in the kitchen." He was quiet. Then, "All right. I'll need lye soap," she said. "And if you have any vinegar in the pantry, I'll need it all. I'll make a list of what else tomorrow after I see what's here." He nodded. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something between relief and something more complicated. "The men eat at 6, he said. "What do they normally get?" "Beans," he said. "Mostly, and cornbread when someone remembers to make it." "Tonight they'll get beans," she said. "Tomorrow they'll get something better." She went to the kitchen and she got to work. The ranch hands found out about her arrival in the way news travels in small contained communities, quickly, with commentary. By the time she had the kitchen fire going and the largest pot on the stove, 2 of them had appeared in the kitchen doorway with the transparent pretense of needing something from the pantry. The first one was young, 20 maybe, with a sunburned neck and the beginnings of a mustache he hadn't fully committed to. He looked at her with the specific expression of a young man trying to decide whether to be respectful or amusing, which in Evelyn's experience usually resolved itself in the direction of amusing unless someone gave him a reason to think otherwise. She gave him a reason. "If you're here for something from the pantry, get it and go," she said without looking up from the pot. "If you're here to look at the new housekeeper, you can close the door on your way out." He got something from the pantry and left with notable speed. The second one was older, perhaps 40, with a beard that had been maintained at some point in its history and hadn't been since. He stood in the doorway longer, watching her work. "You the woman from the train?" he said. "I expect I'm the only new person here," she said. "Word came out about what Grayson did," he said. "That was low." She stirred the pot. "It's done now." He was quiet a moment. Then, "I'm Holt. I'm the foreman." "Mrs. Hartwell," she said. "I'll have supper ready at 6, if you could pass that along." "Yes, ma'am," he said. And that was that. She fed 8 men at 6 o'clock. She had found cornmeal and had made cornbread to go with the beans, and she had found a half-wheel of hard cheese and sliced it thin and set it on the table, and she had heated water for coffee that was hot enough to mean it. The men ate without much conversation, the way men eat when they are genuinely hungry and the food in front of them is genuinely food. And when they were done, 2 of them said thank you and the rest filed out without saying anything at all, which in Evelyn's experience was also a form of appreciation. Silas ate at the end of the table. He didn't say anything to her directly during the meal, but she caught him looking down the table once with an expression she couldn't name. After supper, she washed the dishes alone. She was doing this when she heard boots on the porch, and then Silas came into the kitchen with 2 of the coffee cups refilled, which she hadn't asked him to do. He set one in front of her and stood with his back against the counter. "The men didn't complain," he said. "That's unusual." "What do they usually complain about?" "The food," he said. "The coffee. Each other. The food again." She dried her hands on the cloth hanging from the oven rail. "I've been cooking for ranch hands since I was 30, she said. "I know what they want." He drank his coffee. She drank hers. Outside the window, the night had come fully in, and the cold was against the glass. "There's something you should know," Silas said in a different tone. Not the rancher's tone. Something underneath it. "About the ranch. About why I needed someone here." She waited. "My wife's name was Clara," he said. "She died 4 years ago. Fever. It came fast." He paused. "The house was hers. in the sense that she was the one who knew how to make it function as a home. I know how to run cattle. I know how to manage land and men and money. I do not know how to make a house feel like it's supposed to feel. He looked at the floor. It's been 4 years, and I don't think the men have noticed, but I've noticed, every single day. She didn't say anything immediately. She thought about Edmund, about the particular silence that descends on a house after someone who filled it with sound is gone. I noticed too, she said finally. It's a different kind of empty. He looked at her. My husband died 6 years ago, she said. Not fast, but gone just the same. They stood in the kitchen with the fire going and the cold outside, and neither of them said anything more. And somehow, that was all right. Later, in the small room at the back of the house that Silas had given her. It had been a storage room, but he'd cleared it out and put a bed and a washstand in it, which she appreciated more than she said. Evelyn sat on the edge of the narrow bed and held Edmund's photograph and thought about the day. She had been publicly rejected by a man she had crossed half a continent to meet. She had been rescued, in a manner of speaking, by a stranger. She had fed 8 men in a filthy kitchen and cleaned it afterward. She had had a conversation with her new employer that felt, unexpectedly, like talking to a person rather than a situation to be managed. She put the photograph on the washstand where she could see it. Well, she said to Edmund's face quietly so no one would hear. This is not what I planned. She looked at the ceiling. But it might be something. She lay down on the bed in her clothes because she was too tired to do otherwise, and she listened to the wind coming off the mountains, and she thought about the sky she had seen from the train window, that particular shade of blue that didn't exist back east, and she thought that a sky like that might be a good sign after all. She was 56 years old. She was in Montana. She had nowhere to go back to and only forward to go. Her last thought, before she slept, was simple. Tomorrow, she would make something better. She was up before the sun, not because anyone had asked her to be, and not because she had slept particularly well. The wind had come through the gap under the back room door all night, and the mattress had a depression in the middle that suggested it had been used hard for many years and rested very little. But she had spent enough mornings in her life lying in bed waiting for courage that she'd eventually learned courage didn't come that way. It came from getting up. She built the fire in the kitchen stove while the house was still dark. She had taken inventory the night before, mentally cataloging the pantry the way she used to catalog the root cellar back in Ohio. Not with hope, exactly, but with practical assessment. There were dried beans, cornmeal, a tin of lard, some salt pork that had been there long enough to make her cautious, a half sack of flour that had been tied but not well, oats, and a small jar of molasses that still had an inch left in it. There was dried apple in a paper bag she nearly missed on the back shelf. Not much, but not nothing. She made oatmeal with the molasses and set dried apple to soak in warm water to soften. When Holt came in at 5:30, stamping his boots against the cold, he stopped in the doorway and looked at the table and then at her. Oatmeal, he said. With molasses, she said. An apple when it's ready. Sit down. He sat down. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup she put in front of him, and he drank without speaking, which she respected. Men who needed to make conversation before they were fully awake were exhausting. After a few minutes, he said, "The others will be in at 6. "I know," she said. He watched her for another moment. "You were up early." "I'm always up early," she said. "Does that bother you?" "No," he said. "Clara, Mrs. Crow. She was up early too." He stopped as if he hadn't meant to say that. He looked back at his coffee. Evelyn said nothing. She stirred the oatmeal and let it be. The ranch hands came in at 6 in 1s and 2s with the same general attitude as the night before. Not unfriendly, but wary. The wariness of men who have learned to keep their expectations at a certain level so as not to be disappointed. The young one with the half-formed mustache came in last and sat at the far end of the table. He was trying to look indifferent to the food and failing. His name, she learned over the course of breakfast, was Pete. He was 19. He had come out from Illinois 2 years ago because he'd read something in a newspaper that had given him ideas, and the ideas had brought him to Montana. And Montana had been less like the newspaper and more like actual work. He talked more than the others once he got started, which happened around the second cup of coffee. The man next to him, older, with a quiet that felt chosen rather than natural, was called Dutch, and he had been at the Crow Ranch for 11 years, which made him the longest tenured hand by several years and gave him a settled authority that didn't require him to speak much. Silas came in after the others. He sat at the head of the table the same way he had the night before, not performing authority, just occupying it. And he ate without directing conversation, though he listened to what was around him in the careful way of a man who misses very little. After the men had gone out to begin the day's work, and Silas had taken his coffee out to the porch, Evelyn began what she had been thinking about since she'd opened her eyes that morning. She cleaned the kitchen. Not the surface cleaning she'd managed the night before, which had been triage. This was the real work. She moved the stove away from the wall and cleaned behind it. She pulled everything out of the pantry, wiped the shelves with vinegar water, and put everything back in order with the older goods in front and the newer in back. She scrubbed the floor on her hands and knees with lye soap until the boards, which had been so dark with accumulated grease they looked nearly black, began to show their actual color underneath. A warm, pale pine that had not seen light in at least a year. Her knees ached. Her back made itself known in the persistent way it had been doing since she turned 50. She kept going. Around mid-morning, Pete appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am," he said, "what is it?" "Dutch sent me to ask if you needed anything from the barn." He looked at the floor, which was half scrubbed, and then at her on her knees. I don't need help with the floor," she said. "Tell Dutch thank you." He didn't leave. "Was there something else?" she asked. "The other women," he said, and then stopped. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "What other women?" "There were 2 others," he said, "before you, that Mr. Crow brought on, after Mrs. Crow passed." He was clearly uncomfortable, the way young men are when they've started saying something they can't cleanly finish. "The first one left after about a week, said it was too far from town. The second one," he paused. "She lasted about 3 weeks. Dutch said she cried most of the time." Evelyn looked at him. "And you're telling me this because?" she said. He flushed. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly. "I guess because I didn't want you to not know, and then feel like you didn't know." She considered that for a moment. It was not elegantly put, but it was genuine. "I appreciate that," she said. "Now go tell Dutch I don't need anything from the barn." He went. She went back to scrubbing the floor, and she thought about the 2 women who had come before her and left. She didn't judge them. Montana in November was not what most people imagined when they imagined a new life. The cold alone could hollow you out if you weren't ready for it, and the distance, and the silence, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being the only woman among a group of men who don't quite know what to do with you. Those women had every right to leave. She also had no intention of leaving. By noon, the kitchen floor was clean. She stood up slowly. Her back announced this with considerable emphasis, and she walked to the pantry and looked at what she had to work with for dinner. The salt pork she'd been cautious about was, on closer inspection, not as far gone as she'd feared. She put it on to render. She made biscuits with the flour, twice as many as she thought she needed, because in her experience, men in cold weather and hard work ate considerably more than you expected and complained quietly if there wasn't enough. She made a pot of beans with the pork fat and some dried onion she found in the back of the pantry, and black pepper and a bay leaf, cooked slow and long the way her mother had done it. The kitchen smelled like a place people lived. She hadn't fully realized until she smelled it what had been missing. Silas came in around noon for coffee, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and stood there for a moment without saying anything. "Floor's wet still," she said. "Walk around the side." He walked around the side and stood at the kitchen threshold instead, holding his hat against his thigh. He was looking at the floor. "You did that this morning?" he said. "I started at 6, she said. "It took a while. The boards are good. They just needed to be found again." He looked around the kitchen, at the ordered pantry, the clean stove, the biscuits rising on the shelf near the heat, with an expression she still couldn't fully read. There was something underneath the practical assessment, something older. "Clara would have done it the same way," he said. Not a comparison, just a fact he'd said out loud before he decided whether to. "Is that all right?" Evelyn asked. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It's more than all right." He poured his own coffee and went back outside, and Evelyn went back to the beans. She had been thinking all morning about the house beyond the kitchen. The kitchen was a start, but it was one room. The rest of the house was in varying states of the same neglect. Not malicious, not careless exactly, but the specific kind of disorder that comes from a man who has narrowed his world to what's strictly necessary and let everything else accumulate. She had noticed, in passing through to her room the night before, that one of the front room windows had a crack in the lower pane covered with oilcloth, that the curtains in what appeared to be a sitting room were half off their rod, that there were 2 chairs in the front room and one of them had a broken leg propped up with a folded piece of wood that solved the problem technically, but not particularly well. These were fixable things. She was a person who knew how to fix things. After dinner, which was eaten largely in silence, but with what she identified as appreciative silence, which was the better kind, she went to Silas and told him what she needed. She was specific: glass for the window, or at minimum something better than oilcloth, thread and a needle if there was any in the house, wood glue or nails, and a hammer for the chair. She also told him the pantry needed restocking before the end of the week, and she gave him a list. He looked at the list for a moment. "You wrote this fast," he said. "I kept it in my head all morning," she said. "Then I wrote it down." He looked up. There was something in his face, not amusement exactly, but the cousin of it. "I'll send Holt into town Thursday," he said. "Is Thursday too long?" "Thursday is fine," she said. "I'll manage until then." She managed. Not easily and not perfectly. And there were moments across those first few days when her body staged protests of varying severity. Her back on the second night, her hands by the end of the third day when the cold and the lye soap had worked on them until the skin cracked at the knuckles. She kept a cloth in her apron pocket and attended to the cracks when they got bad and kept working. The men noticed. Not immediately and not all at once, but by Thursday, when the kitchen was clean and the front room curtains had been rehung and the chair with the broken leg had been properly repaired with nails and wood glue she found in the barn. There was a different quality to the way they moved through the house. Quieter, somehow. More deliberate. Pete stopped appearing in the kitchen doorway to look at her and started appearing in the kitchen doorway to ask if she needed anything brought in from outside, which was different and which she accepted. Dutch said nothing for 4 days and then on Thursday evening set a bundle of dried sage on the kitchen table. "Grows along the east fence line," he said. "Claire used to like it for cooking." "Thank you," Evelyn said. He nodded and left, and she put the sage in a jar on the shelf where she could see it. Holt came back from town Thursday afternoon with the supplies she'd listed and, also she noticed, a small jar of vanilla extract that had not been on the list. "I thought maybe, He set it on the table and looked away. "For baking, if you do that." "I do that," she said. She made a cake on Sunday. Nothing complicated. A simple cornmeal cake sweetened with molasses and the vanilla, baked in the Dutch oven with dried apples sliced across the top. She made it because Sunday was a harder day than the others, the kind of day when men who are far from home feel the distance most. She had learned that from Edmund, who had grown up on a ranch and told her once that Sunday dinners were the thing he remembered best about his mother. Not the food specifically, but the sense that someone had taken the day seriously. She took it seriously. The men ate the cake without a great deal of ceremony, which was what she expected. But Pete ate 2 pieces and looked briefly stricken with something between surprise and gratitude, and Dutch ate his slowly, the way a person eats something they want to last, and that was enough. Silas ate 1 piece and then sat at the table after the others had gone and looked at the remaining cake for a moment. "My wife made cake on Sundays," he said. "A lot of women do," Evelyn said. "I know," he said. "It's not—" He stopped. "I just hadn't had it in a while, that's all." She sat down across from him, which she hadn't done before. She had been careful to maintain a working distance, not because she felt it was required, but because she understood that a household needed time to settle before certain things were appropriate. But he looked in that moment like a man who was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix, and she recognized that tiredness. "How long were you married?" she asked. 18 years, he said. "She came out here with me when this place was nothing. We built it together." He looked at his hands on the table. "She was better at it than I was, most of it. The people part. She could talk to anyone. He made a small gesture. I am better with horses. I noticed, Evelyn said. He looked at her. You're easier out there than you are in here, she said. That's not a criticism. My husband was the same. The house made him nervous. He was always looking for something to fix. Did that bother you? She thought about it honestly. Sometimes, she said, but I understood it. He showed what he felt by doing, not by saying. Some people are like that. Silas was quiet for a while. Clara used to say I wasn't hard to read, he said. She said most people just didn't try. She sounds like she was a perceptive woman, Evelyn said. She was, he said. She would have... He stopped. He closed that sentence off deliberately, the way you close a door that opens onto something you're not ready to look at. She would have liked that you fixed the chair, he said instead. It bothered her for years. I kept saying I'd get to it. Men always say they'll get to it, Evelyn said. Something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she counted it. I suppose they do, he said. He got up from the table. He rinsed his own plate, which she hadn't expected, and set it on the drying rack, and he put his hat back on and looked at her for a moment from the doorway. The house feels different, he said. I want you to know I've noticed. Thank you, she said. Get some sleep, he said. You've been up before everyone else for a week. I'll sleep when there's less to do, she said. He gave her a look that was the exact expression of a man who knows an argument is pointless and has decided not to have it. And then he went out, and she heard his boots on the porch, and then the quiet. She sat at the table alone for a few minutes. She was tired. More tired than she'd been in a long time. The deep physical tiredness of sustained work, which was actually a better kind of tired than the hollow, purposeless tiredness of months in a boarding house doing nothing in particular. This tiredness had a shape. You could point to what made it. Her hands hurt. She looked at them in the lamplight, the cracked knuckles, the roughened skin, the way the cold had worked into them. Edmund used to hold her hands at the end of hard days and rub some warmth back into them, which was a small thing but one she had thought about with unexpected frequency since he'd been gone. She got up and banked the fire and went to her room. She had, over the past week, made small adjustments to the back room. The gap under the door had been stuffed with a strip of oilcloth she'd cut from the piece that had been on the window. She had a second blanket now. Holt had found it in a trunk and brought it without being asked. She had put Edmund's photograph on the washstand, and she had put the small jar of Dutch's sage beside it, for no reason she could have explained clearly except that it felt right to have something living in the room, even if it was just dried sage. She lay down and looked at the ceiling. The week had been harder than she had let anyone see. Not the physical work. She had expected that, and she was built for it in the particular way of women who have worked all their lives and learned not to flinch from labor. It was the other things. The moments when the loneliness came at unexpected angles, usually in the afternoon, when the house was quiet and the men were out and she could hear the wind. The awareness of how far she was from everything familiar. The knowledge that she was, despite the position and the room and the work, still something temporary, still a woman in a 3-month arrangement with no guarantees about what came after. She had not let herself think past the 3 months. That was a discipline she'd imposed on herself the morning after she arrived, because looking too far forward was its own kind of danger. But the house was coming alive under her hands, and the men had begun to trust her with small things, and Silas Crow had sat across from her and talked about his wife with the careful openness of a man who hadn't done that with anyone in a very long time. And there was something in all of that, something she didn't have a clean word for, that felt like it might be worth protecting. She was thinking about this when she heard it. Voices, outside. Not the normal sounds of a working ranch at night. Not a horse moving in the barn or someone crossing the yard with a lantern. These were voices at a distance, low and purposeful, and then the sound of cattle moving, which was wrong at this hour, and then a single sharp sound that she identified after a second's stillness as a rifle shot. She was up and had her coat on before the echo finished. She went to the kitchen and got the lantern and lit it, and went to the back door and opened it, and the cold came in hard and immediate. Across the dark yard she could see light in the barn and the silhouettes of men moving fast, and she could hear Silas's voice, Not the words, but the tone, which was controlled and very serious, directing someone. She stood in the doorway and made herself assess rather than react. Something was wrong with the cattle. And whatever was wrong had Silas Crow and his men moving through the dark at a pace that meant it was worse than routine. She went back to the kitchen and stoked the fire high. She put the largest pot on to boil. She did not know yet what had happened or what would be needed, but she knew that when men came in from trouble in the cold, the first things they needed were warmth and something hot to drink, and she would have both ready. She waited. Holt came in first 20 minutes later with a gash along his forearm where something, a wire, from the look of it, had cut him. He was holding it with his other hand and the blood had come through. "Sit down," she said. She had already found the clean cloths and the tin of carbolic salve she'd located in the pantry on her first day. "It's not bad," he said. "Sit down anyway," she said. He sat. She cleaned the cut in the lamplight, working efficiently, applying pressure and then the salve, wrapping it with a clean strip of cloth. Holt watched her hands with the expression of a man who expected to be told something unpleasant and kept being surprised that it wasn't unpleasant. "How'd it happen?" she asked. "Wire fence on the east pasture," he said. "Someone cut it. We lost about 30 head through the gap before we caught it." She looked up. "Cut it deliberately?" "3 cuts, evenly spaced," he said. "That's not an accident." She tied off the bandage. "Who would do that?" Holt looked at her for a moment with the assessment of a man deciding how much to say to someone who hasn't been here long enough to have earned all of it. "There's been trouble, he said finally, "with a man named Garth Bellamy. He runs cattle east of us, and he's been trying to get Mr. Crow to sell off the east pasture for 2 years. Mr. Crow won't." "And so the fence gets cut," Evelyn said. "This is the 3rd time," Holt said, "but it was wire before. Tonight someone used wire cutters and did it right." He paused. "And the shot. That was a warning, aimed high, into the dark." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the bandage on his arm. "There'll be more men coming in," she said. "I've got the stove hot." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She fed them all when they came in, us, Pete and Dutch, and the 2 other hands, cold and tired and in varying states of agitation. She made coffee strong enough to make a point and kept it coming, and she heated the beans left from dinner, and she did not ask questions because this was not the moment for questions. She listened instead to the fragments of conversation that moved around the table while the men ate and warmed up, and from the fragments she assembled a picture. Garth Bellamy was not a man who accepted the word no. He had money, and he had influence, and he had a lawyer in Helena who wrote letters that made things sound legal that were not entirely legal, and he had been working on Silas Crow's eastern land for 2 years with the patience of a man who believes eventually the other man will tire. The fence cuts had been happening with increasing frequency. The cattle lost tonight were not the first cattle lost, and Silas had, so far, dealt with this the way Silas dealt with most things, directly, stubbornly, and largely alone. He came in last when the others had mostly gone. He was cold through, the kind of cold that comes from being outside in Montana at night for the better part of 2 hours without moving fast enough to stay warm, and there was mud on his coat and something that might have been a bruise beginning on the side of his jaw. He sat down at the table without speaking. She put coffee in front of him. She put a plate of beans in front of him. She sat down across from him, the way she had done earlier that evening, which felt like a very long time ago now. "How bad?" she said. 32 head, he said. "We got most of them back. Lost 4 in the dark, might find them tomorrow." He drank the coffee without looking up. "The fence line was cut clean. This was planned." "Holt told me about Bellamy," she said. He looked at her. "He didn't tell me much," she said. "Just that there's been trouble, and this wasn't the first time." Silas was quiet. He ate some of the beans. Outside the wind was up again, the same wind that had been at the door all week, the kind that made the house feel both more vulnerable and more necessary. "Bellamy wants the east pasture because it connects his land to the river access," Silas said. "Without my piece, his cattle have to be driven an extra 8 miles to water. He made a fair offer 2 years ago. I turned it down. Since then, the offers have stopped and the trouble has started." "What kind of trouble?" Evelyn asked. "Besides the fence." He looked at her for a moment. "Why are you asking?" Because I've been here a week, and I'd rather know what's around me than find out sideways, she said. He considered that. Then, fence cuts 3 times, cattle turned out once before tonight, a fire in the south hay barn last spring. We couldn't prove it was him, but... He paused. And letters to the county land office questioning my title on the east pasture. His lawyer is good, and the questions are technical, but they're manufactured. Do you have the original deeds? She asked. In the strong box, he said. But there's paperwork from when I bought the parcel in '74, and Bellamy's lawyer is saying there was an error in the survey, which there wasn't, but proving it requires... He stopped. It requires things I don't have time for, which is part of what he's counting on. Evelyn looked at the table. She thought about the kind of man who works on another man's patience the way water works on stone. Not by force, but by persistence, by wearing down the edges until the shape changes. You need to document everything, she said. Every incident. Date, what happened, who saw it, in writing, with signatures if you can get them. He looked at her. I know that sounds like the slow way, she said. But if he's manufactured a paper problem, you need a paper answer. A lawyer can't argue with a dated record witnessed by 8 men. Silas was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her with the particular attention of a man reevaluating something he thought he'd already assessed. Where did you learn that? He said. My husband had a property dispute with a neighbor for 3 years, she said. We lost the first round because we didn't have documentation. We won the second because we did. She paused. It's not a frontier skill. It's just a practical one. He looked at her for another long moment. All right, he said. She got up and cleared the plate and the cup. Get some sleep, she said, which she realized was exactly what he had said to her 2 hours ago, and which almost made her smile. He noticed. You're not wrong, he said. He went out, and she banked the fire for the second time that night and went to her room. She lay down and looked at the ceiling, and she thought that the house had changed in the past week, yes, but that the change she hadn't expected was in herself. She was not the woman who had stood on that platform with her suitcase and a crushed hope and nowhere to go. She was not the woman from the boarding house, or the woman from the farm, or any of the women she had been in the sequence of losses that had brought her here. She was, for the first time in a long time, the woman who had an idea that might actually help. She held on to that thought the way you hold on to something in the dark when the wind is up and the cold is against the walls. It was enough to sleep on. She started the incident log the morning after the fence cutting. She found a ledger book in the bottom drawer of the desk in Silas's front office, a room she had not entered before, which felt like someone else's territory, which it was. She knocked on the open door and waited until he looked up. I need a ledger, she said, or a blank journal. Something with pages. He looked at her. What for? The documentation, she said. We talked about it last night. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ledger in his own hands, ranch accounts from the look of it, and then at the drawer, and then he pulled the bottom drawer open and took out the book she'd already spotted and put it on the edge of the desk. That one's empty, he said. Thank you, she said. She took it to the kitchen table where the morning light was best, and she opened to the first page and wrote the date of the first fence cutting she knew of, which Holt had told her was August of that year, and the number of cattle turned out, and the names of the men who witnessed it. She wrote it in the plain, factual style her husband had taught her during their own property dispute. Not dramatic, not editorial, just what happened, when, and who saw it. Facts were facts only when you wrote them down before memory started editing them. Holt came in for coffee and watched her write. Mr. Crow asked you to do this? He said. We agreed it needed doing, she said. Can you remember the exact date of the August fence cut? As close as you can. He thought about it. 3rd week of August, he said. I remember because we'd just finished the South Pasture rotation. August 18th or 19th. Who else was there? Dutch, me. Young Pete had just started. He'd been here maybe 2 weeks. And Crow himself. She wrote it down. The hay barn fire in spring. When exactly? Holt sat down across from her with his coffee. He had the expression of a man who was deciding something and then decided. April, he said. Early April. The ground was still hard. I remember the mud froze overnight and made it harder to get water from the well. He paused. That one. We all knew it was set, the way it started in 3 places at once. But Mr. Crow said we couldn't prove it without proof. He was right, Evelyn said. But we can write down what you saw, what it looked like. 3 points of origin. She wrote, "Who else saw it?" He gave her names. She wrote them all. She spent 3 days on the ledger, going to each of the ranch hands in turn. Dutch at the fence line while he worked, Pete in the barn, the 2 other hands named Cord and Reyes during their noon break, asking questions in the specific way she had learned, which was not leading but not vague either. She wanted what they saw, not what they thought. And she told them that, and most of them responded to the distinction better than she expected. Silas watched this process from a distance. He did not interfere, but she caught him looking at her across the yard when she was talking to Dutch. And once, when she came in from the barn after speaking to Cord and Reyes, he was at the kitchen table with his coffee, which meant he had been there a while. "They're talking to you," he said. "They're answering questions," she said. "There's a difference, but it's a small one." "Dutch hasn't talked to a woman at length since Clara died," he said. "I've heard him say more in 3 days than in the past 2 months. She poured herself coffee and sat down. "He misses having someone listen," she said. "Men in a working crew don't really listen to each other. They talk, but they're not listening. It's different." Silas looked at his cup. "I didn't know that," he said. "You do it too," she said. "You hear what your men say. You don't always hear what they mean." He was quiet for a moment, then, without defensiveness, "How do you tell the difference?" "You pay attention to what they don't say," she said. "Pete talks about Illinois constantly. That means he's homesick and won't admit it. Dutch brings things. The sage, a piece of rope he braided and left on the kitchen step yesterday, and doesn't explain them. That means he's grateful and doesn't have the words. Holt," she paused. "Holt watches the house the way a man watches something he's been taking care of and is relieved to hand over. He was holding things together here. He's tired." Silas looked at her. "You've been here 2 weeks," he said. "I've been watching people for 56 years, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you see when you look at me?" She looked at him directly. He held the look, which she appreciated. Some men looked away when they asked a question they actually wanted answered. "A man who is used to solving problems with his hands and his will," she said. "Who is afraid that those tools aren't going to be enough for the problem he has now, and who doesn't want anyone to see that he's afraid?" The silence between them had weight, not uncomfortable weight, the weight of a thing said that can't be unsaid, which is different. "That's accurate," he said finally. "I know," she said. She finished the ledger on a Thursday, 14 days after she'd arrived in Red Hollow. By that point, it contained 8 documented incidents going back 18 months, each with dates, witnesses, descriptions of damage, and her own plain language assessment of what the documentation showed. She wasn't a lawyer, but she had been married to a careful man and had watched a careful lawyer win a case on paper, and she understood the basic principle. You couldn't argue with a consistent record signed by credible witnesses. She put the ledger on Silas's desk that evening after supper. He picked it up and read through it. He was quiet the whole time he was reading. She stood at the window and watched the dark yard and waited. "This is thorough," he said. "It needs a lawyer," she said. "Someone in Helena who can look at what Bellamy's people filed on the survey and answer it specifically. But this," she pointed at the ledger, "this gives him something to work with, a pattern of harassment with witnesses. That's different from a rancher complaining about a neighbor." He turned a page. He read. He turned another. "Evelyn," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "You were hired to manage the house." She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I've been managed out of places before," she said, "by people with more paperwork than they had right. And I didn't like it, and I don't like seeing it happen to someone else." She paused. "Also, I live here now. Even if it's temporary, I live here. What threatens this place threatens me." He looked at her for a long moment. "Even if it's temporary," he repeated. 3 months is what we agreed," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." He looked back at the ledger, but she noticed he didn't close it. The trouble with Bellamy arrived in person 10 days later. She was in the garden. She had cleared the dead growth of what had been Clara's kitchen garden and turned the soil and put in winter cabbage, which was too late in the season by any reasonable measure, but she had done it anyway because the beds were there and empty when the buckboard came up the road. Two men on the seat, one driving and one sitting with the particular posture of a man who considers himself to be arriving. She had not seen Garth Bellamy before, but she knew him the way you know certain types of men. The ones who take up space deliberately, who arrange their bodies in rooms and on seats and on horseback to communicate exactly as much authority as they want you to register. He was perhaps 55, heavy-set, with a good coat and the beginning of a belly that hadn't been there 10 years ago and hadn't been fully acknowledged yet. He had small eyes and an easy smile, which she had always found to be an unpleasant combination. He looked at her in the garden with the particular expression of a man who doesn't know who she is and isn't sure she's relevant. "Is Crow here?" he said to her in the tone men use when they want an answer quickly from someone they don't consider part of the conversation. "I'll let him know you're here," she said. "Who should I say is calling?" He told her. She went inside without hurrying, which she could tell irritated him, and she found Silas in the barn with Holt and told him quietly. "What does he look like?" Silas said. "Like a man who's used to waiting being done by other people," she said. Something in Silas's jaw set. He handed Holt the piece of equipment they'd been working on and went out, and Evelyn went back to the garden and stayed there because she wanted to hear and because the garden was a reasonable place to be. She heard most of it. Bellamy was cordial. That was the thing about him. He had the manner of a man making a friendly call, not the manner of a man who'd had wire fences cut on his neighbor's property 3 times in 8 months. He spoke about the winter coming hard, about cattle prices, about the difficulty of running a ranch operation in Montana when the land surveys were so inconsistently done. He brought around, eventually, to the East pasture. He had a new offer, he said. Better than fair. His lawyer had identified a concern about the survey that he wanted Silas to understand was not a threat, simply a reality, one that made the title on that parcel difficult. "Difficult how?" Silas said. "Open to question," Bellamy said. "In a court, say. Which I don't want. Which I'm sure you don't want. These things cost money and time and don't always go the way you expect." He paused. "My offer would avoid all that." "Your lawyer's been writing to the county land office for 7 months," Silas said. "Out of an abundance of caution," Bellamy said, "to protect both our interests." "Both our interests," Silas said. The flatness in his voice was impressive, so he didn't inject it with anger or mockery, he just set it back. Bellamy's easy smile stayed where it was. He made the offer. It was, Evelyn admitted to herself, not a contemptible number. But numbers were not the point, and all 3 of them knew it. "No," Silas said. "Silas." Bellamy dropped the formality slightly, in the way men do when they want to suggest that they're being led into your first name as a privilege. "I'm trying to avoid a situation here that gets ugly for everyone. The survey issue—" "There's no survey issue," Silas said. "I've had that parcel surveyed twice. My deeds are in order. If your lawyer has found something to question, your lawyer manufactured it." The easy smile went away. It didn't become angry exactly. It became something more careful, which was in some ways worse. "That's a serious thing to say," Bellamy said. "I know what it is," Silas said. Bellamy looked at him for a moment. Then he looked, briefly, toward the garden, toward Evelyn. She kept her eyes on the turned soil and did not look up. "You've got new people around," Bellamy said, still looking toward the garden. "I've got a household to run," Silas said. "Same as always." "Just new faces," Bellamy said. "Makes a man think." There was something in the way he said it that made the skin on Evelyn's forearms tighten. Not a threat, not quite. An observation worn to look like a pleasantry. "My answer is no," Silas said. "Same as the last time and the time before." Bellamy picked up his hat. "I hope you're sure about that," he said. "Because once the legal process starts, it's harder to stop than people expect." He settled the hat on his head. "I'll see you around, Silas." He left. Silas stood in the yard until the buckboard was out of sight. Evelyn waited. When she heard his boots on the garden path, she looked up. His face was controlled, but she knew by now where to look, around the eyes, in the set of his jaw. And what she saw was not anger, so much as the exhausted tightness of a man who has been fighting the same battle long enough that the fighting itself has started to cost him. "He's going to move forward with the legal challenge," Silas said. "Probably," she said, "and he's going to keep cutting fences and doing whatever he does in the meantime, because that's how he applies pressure." He looked at the road where the buckboard had gone. "I've been through 3 hands in the past year. 2 of them left because of Bellamy's interference. He got to them somehow. Money or threats, I don't know. And without enough men, I can't—" He stopped. "Silas," she said. He looked at her. "When did you last sleep a full night?" she said. He opened his mouth and then closed it. That was its own answer. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put coffee on and we can think about this properly." "There's work. Holt can manage the work for 1 hour," she said. "Come inside." He came inside. She made the coffee, and she sat across from him, and she told him what she'd been thinking since Bellamy's buckboard appeared on the road. "He's counting on you to fight this the way you fight everything," she said. "Directly, stubbornly, alone. The fence cuts, the legal letters, they're all designed to wear you down and wear your men down and make the whole thing more trouble than it's worth." "I know that," Silas said. "So you can't fight it the way he expects," she said. "The ledger is a start, but you need more than documentation. You need the county behind you, or enough of it. You need people in Red Hollow who will say on paper, with their names, that they know your land, your operation, your character." She paused. "Who in this county owes you something? Not a favor. I mean something real. Someone you helped when they needed it." He thought about that. "Jim Alderton, east of town," he said. "His cattle got through our fence 2 winters ago when we had the bad ice storm. We wintered them for him, 4 months, no charge. He's been meaning to pay me back in some form." "Who else?" "The Vasquez family north of the river. Martin Vasquez. His oldest boy rode for me 2 summers. I paid him fair and gave him a horse when he left to start his own place." "Who else?" Silas looked at her. "Why does this matter?" "Because Bellamy has a lawyer and money," she said. "You have a community. A community that will speak is worth more than money in the right court, and it is worth considerably more than money in a land office that answers to public pressure." She said this plainly, not as inspiration, just as the practical fact it was. If 10 men in this county write to the land office saying they have known Silas Crow for 20 years and know his land and his title and his character, that is 10 men your lawyer can cite. Bellamy can manufacture a survey problem. He cannot manufacture 10 good men saying you're honest. Silas was quiet for a long time. "You thought about this before today," he said. "Since the first night," she said. "Since Holt told me what Bellamy was doing." He looked at his coffee. He was working through something. She could see it, the internal shifting of a man who has been facing something alone and is trying to decide whether to allow help. "I don't ask for favors easily," he said. "I know," she said. "But this isn't a favor. This is people standing up for something true. That's different." She held his look. "Let me help." He was quiet for a moment longer. Then, "All right." She rode into Red Hollow with Holt the following Wednesday. It was her first time in town since she'd arrived, and she looked at it with different eyes than she'd had standing on the station platform 6 weeks ago. Not the eyes of a woman stranded, but the eyes of a woman who needed to understand the place she was operating in. Red Hollow was not a large town. 1 main street, a general store, a land office, a bank, a courthouse the size of a generous parlor, 2 saloons, a church she did not enter. But she had learned in the years of her marriage that small towns ran on relationships the way machinery ran on grease, and that the relationships were already there if you knew how to look. She started at the general store. The owner was a man named August Cole, thin and precise, with the particular wariness of a merchant who has learned that everyone who comes through his door wants something. He thawed slightly when she introduced herself, Silas Crow's housekeeper, just arrived in November, and considerably more when she placed a supply order larger than he'd seen from the Crow Ranch in 2 years, which Silas had authorized, because he understood what she was doing, even if he found it difficult to do himself. She talked to August Cole for 30 minutes. She talked about the ranch, about the winter coming in, about what she'd found when she arrived and what she'd done with it. She talked about Silas, not sentimentally, but specifically, the way you talk about a man's actual qualities rather than the ones you want him to have. She talked about what he had built in this valley over 20 years, and she talked about the fence cuts, matter-of-factly, without melodrama, the way she would have discussed a crop failure or a flooding season. August Cole, she had already established through careful inquiry, did not like Garth Bellamy. Bellamy had tried to put pressure on his grain pricing twice in the past 3 years, and while Cole was too careful to say this, she had enough information to work around it. "It's a hard thing," she said, at the natural opening in the conversation, "to build something for 20 years and have a man with a lawyer try to take it on paper. The land is his. Anyone who knows this valley knows that." Cole was quiet for a moment. "It is his," he said. "I wonder," she said carefully, "whether a man like Silas, who isn't the type to ask, whether it would mean something to him to know that the people in this town, people who've done business with him for 20 years, would say so. In writing, if it came to that." Cole looked at her with the reassessment she was becoming familiar with, the look that said he had expected something simple and received something more considered. "I'd say so," he said. "If it came to that." "I'll tell him," she said. "He won't ask himself. But I think he'd be glad to know it." She had 4 conversations of that kind over the course of the morning. Each was different. Martin Vasquez was warm and immediate, the kind of man who expressed loyalty through action and was clearly relieved to have a specific way to show it. Jim Alderton was slower and more careful, but arrived at the same place. The town clerk, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove, who had been at her desk in the courthouse for 16 years, and had seen the land office filings in question and had opinions about them she was not supposed to express. Expressed them anyway to Evelyn over a cup of tea in a way that gave Evelyn 3 pieces of information she had not had before. She got back to the wagon at noon and found Holt where she'd left him, having apparently spent the morning in conversation with the blacksmith. "Ready?" he said. "Ready?" she said. On the way back, Holt drove in silence for a while, the way he did when he was working something out. Then he said, "What exactly did you do in there all morning?" "Talk to people," she said. "About what?" "About the ranch," she said. "About Silas. About what people in this valley know to be true." She paused. "About how truth is most useful when it's spoken out loud." Holt considered this. "You think it'll matter?" "I think Bellamy is counting on Silas being isolated," she said. "I think the best thing we can do is make sure he's not." She was in the kitchen starting supper when Silas came back from the south pasture. He came directly to the kitchen, which told her he'd seen Holt and knew she was back. He stood in the doorway with his coat still on. "How'd it go?" he said. "August Cole will write a letter," she said. "Martin Vasquez will do more than that. He said he'd go to Helena himself if it came to a hearing. Jim Alderton will write and get his brother-in-law to write, who's on the county board of assessment." She turned from the stove. "And Mrs. Hargrove at the clerk's office told me, privately, that the filing Bellamy's lawyer submitted in September has a procedural problem that she flagged to the land commissioner in October and is waiting to hear back on. She said she flagged it because it looked, and I'm using her word, irregular." Silas looked at her. "She said that," he said. "She said that," Evelyn confirmed. "So your lawyer needs to get to Helena and find out what happened with that flag before Bellamy's lawyer does." He was still looking at her with the expression she recognized now, the one that was not quite surprise, because surprise implied he hadn't seen it coming, and she thought by now he had stopped being surprised by her, but he hadn't stopped being impressed, which was different. "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said. "The beans are almost done. Wash up." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He came back 10 minutes later, washed, coat off, and sat at the table while she finished supper, and for a while the kitchen was just the sound of the stove and the smell of beans and the last winter light coming through the window, and it was comfortable in the way of 2 people who have learned each other's silences. Then Silas said quietly, "I want you to know I'm aware of what you've done here." She didn't stop what she was doing. "You don't need to—" "I do," he said. The house, the men, the ledger. Today. He paused. She was the person in our marriage who knew how to do this, how to hold a community together, how to talk to people, how to make allies without them knowing they'd become allies. He said this not with grief exactly, but with the particular ache of someone describing a quality they have spent years trying to replace with something else and couldn't. I thought that was just her specifically. It might have been, Evelyn said. I'm a different person. I do it differently. I know, he said. I'm not saying you're her. I'm saying, he stopped, found it. I'm saying I see you, what you're doing. I don't want it to go unseen. She turned around. He was looking at her with the direct, careful look she had come to recognize as the truest expression on his face, the one he reserved for things that actually mattered. Thank you, she said. That means something. They ate supper. The men came in and ate and went out. The dishes were done and the fire was banked and the house settled into night around her, and Evelyn went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and held Edmund's photograph and felt something she hadn't expected to feel so soon. Not happiness, exactly. Not yet. But the adjacent thing. The thing that makes the ground solid under your feet when it's been uncertain for a long time. Something like belonging. She was still turning that word over in her mind when she heard the horses. Not one or two. Several, moving fast on the road from the south. She was at the window in seconds, and what she saw made her breath catch. Fire. Not the house. The south hay barn, the one that had burned last spring. The rebuilt one. The one the men had worked 2 weeks to put back up. It was burning with the bright, deliberate efficiency of a fire that had been started well, and in the dark she could see figures on horseback moving away from it at speed, heading back toward the south road, toward Bellamy's land. She was out of her room in seconds. She hit the back door hard and shouted into the dark with a voice that came from somewhere she hadn't accessed in years. Not a scream, not panic, but the carrying shout of a woman who has spent decades making herself heard over wind and cattle and the noise of working land. Fire! South barn! Fire! Everyone up! The ranch came awake. And this time, Evelyn did not stay in the kitchen. She ran. The south barn went fast. Hay barns always did. There was nothing to be done about the structure itself. By the time Evelyn reached the yard, the roof had already caught, and the men who arrived ahead of her were forming a line not to save the barn, but to keep the fire from jumping to the main barn 40 yards north, where the horses were. She understood this immediately and didn't waste time on the wrong fight. Wet burlap, she shouted at Pete, who was standing at the well looking at the fire with the frozen expression of someone whose body hasn't caught up to the emergency yet. Everything in the supply shed, burlap sacks, any canvas, wet it all down and get it to Holt. He moved. She moved too. She went to the main barn first, not because she was braver than the situation required, but because she was thinking ahead of it. The horses were already agitated. She could hear them from 20 yards out, that particular high, tight sound horses make when they smell smoke, and their instincts are telling them to run. She got the barn doors open and she went in and she talked to the nearest horse the way she had always talked to frightened animals, low and steady and continuous, not trying to calm it down so much as giving it something to listen to besides the fire. Dutch was already inside. He was working his way down the stalls, unlatching each one, moving with the contained speed of a man who knows that rushing will cost him more time than it saves. He looked at her over the back of a gray mare who was trying to pull her head away from his hands. Get the ones on the east side, he said. Leave the doors open. They'll go out on their own if they have to. She went east, 4 stalls. She worked fast, talking the whole time, her hands on necks and shoulders, not gripping, just present. The 4th horse, a big roan gelding Silas used for ranch work, was the worst of them, pressed into the back corner of the stall with his ears flat. She spent 45 seconds on him that felt like 4 minutes, just her hand on his neck and her voice, until something in him shifted and he let himself be moved. She got him out. By the time she emerged from the barn, the fire line had been established. The men were doing what men who know their land do in a crisis. Not heroically, not smoothly, but effectively, with the rough competence of people who've handled bad things before and know that bad things require work, not inspiration. Holt had the wet burlap operation organized. Cord and Reyes were on the north face of the burning barn, beating back sparks with wet sacking. Pete had found a second bucket line from somewhere and was running it with more efficiency than she'd credited him for. Silas was at the center of it. He had been out here before her. She didn't know how, unless he slept lighter than she did. And he was everywhere at once in the way of a man who knows every inch of his land and every one of his men, directing without shouting, appearing where he was needed and moving on. She watched him for a moment from across the yard and thought, this is what he looks like when he's in his element. Not the man at the kitchen table with coffee and exhaustion. This man. The south barn burned for 2 hours. When it was down to embers and the danger of spread had passed, the men stood around it in the dark with the particular silence of people looking at something they built that's been taken from them. Nobody spoke for a while. The embers popped and settled. The smoke moved north on the wind. Silas stood at the edge of the burned footprint and looked at it for a long time. Evelyn came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything. Some moments didn't need words, and adding them would have been a kind of damage. After a while, he said quietly, "Second time." "I know," she said. "I watched those men put that barn up board by board," he said. 2 weeks of work." He paused. "I can build it again. That's not the point." "I know," she said. "The point is he thinks he can keep doing this until you break." "Can he?" Silas said. She looked at him. He was not asking rhetorically. He was genuinely tired. She could see it now in the firelight, in the set of his shoulders, in the particular flatness of a man who has been absorbing blows for long enough that the absorption itself has become the effort. "No," she said, "but only if we move faster than he does." He looked at her. "Riders," she said. "Tonight, if you have men to spare, to Vasquez and to Alderton. Not for letters, for witnesses. I want people who can say they saw the fire and saw the direction those riders came from and went to." She kept her voice low and even. "And I want to go back to the ledger tonight, right now, and add this while everyone's memory is fresh." "It's past midnight," he said. "I know what time it is," she said. He looked at the embers for another moment. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the dry, exhausted cousin of one. "All right," he said. "Pete and Reyes can ride. They're youngest." "Send Dutch with one of them," she said. "He carries more authority." Silas looked at her sideways. "You've figured out my men better than I have." "You've been too busy to look," she said. "That's not a criticism. You've been holding this place together alone. It takes everything you have." He didn't argue with that. She was at the kitchen table with the ledger at 12:30, writing by lamplight. Silas sat across from her with coffee neither of them needed at this hour and gave her the account of the fire in the careful, factual way she had taught him. When he first heard it, what he saw when he came out, the direction of the riders, their approximate number, the speed and direction of their departure. She wrote it all down. She dated it. She noted the witness list. Herself, Holt, Dutch, Pete, Cord, Reyes, Silas. 8 witnesses, she said, without looking up. "Is that enough?" "For the ledger, yes," she said. "For a court, we'd want more. But for the land commissioner and for your lawyer, 8 witnesses saying the same thing in writing is something Bellamy's lawyer will have a very hard time explaining away." She finished the entry and set down the pen. "You need to write to your lawyer tomorrow morning. Tonight, technically. First thing." "I don't have a lawyer in Helena," he said. She looked up. "You said—" "I said I needed one," he said. "I haven't gotten to it." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who knows he's about to be told something he already knows. "Silas," she said, "this man has been working against you for 2 years with a lawyer. You've been working against him alone." "I know," he said. "That ends tomorrow," she said. "I'll help you write the letter tonight. We'll send it with Pete in the morning. He can make Helena in 2 days if he pushes." "You do that," he said, meaning write the letter. "I'll draft it, and you'll read it and correct whatever I've got wrong," she said. "It's your land and your case, but 2 people thinking is better than 1 when you're tired." He was quiet, then, My father would have hated that. What? Asking for help, he said. He thought it was a sign of weakness. He came out here in 1849 with $40 and a horse, and he built everything from nothing, and he believed a man who needed help deserved what he got. He said it without bitterness, just with the particular flatness of a belief you've inherited and spent years deciding whether to keep. I think I've been running on that for 20 years. How's it working? Evelyn said. He almost smiled. Not well, recently. Your father wasn't wrong that a man should be able to stand on his own, she said. But standing on your own doesn't mean standing alone. It means being the kind of person other people are willing to stand with. You've spent 20 years building that, whether you know it or not. He looked at her with the look, the direct, careful, this matters look. Where'd you learn to talk like that? He said. From 56 years of being the person nobody thought to ask, she said. They wrote the letter together at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low between them, the house quiet around them, the smell of smoke still in their clothes. It took an hour and 3 drafts because Silas was precise about language in the way of a man who grew up mistrusting words that promised more than they delivered. And Evelyn had to balance his precision against the need for the letter to be persuasive rather than merely accurate. They argued about 2 sentences. She won one. He won one. The final letter was better than either version. Pete left at first light with the letter and $5 for expenses and instructions to come back with a response or a timeline, whichever the lawyer could provide first. Silas watched him ride out from the porch. Evelyn stood beside him with coffee. The morning was very cold, the kind that made the sky a hard, pale blue at the horizon. He'll be all right, she said. He's 19, Silas said. He's a capable 19, she said. You know that. I do, he said. He drank his coffee. He was quiet for a while with the particular quiet of a man who is on the other side of a sleepless night and hasn't fully arrived at the new day yet. Then he said, You've been here 2 months. 8 weeks and 2 days, she said. The 3-month arrangement, he said. It ends in less than 4 weeks. She said nothing. She had known this was coming, had known it since the 2nd week, if she was honest, when the kitchen floor came clean and the house started to feel like itself, and she started to understand that she was not going to want to leave it. She had spent considerable energy not thinking about that directly. I'm aware, she said. I'd like you to stay, he said. He said it the same way he said everything important, not dramatically, not tentatively, just as a fact he was presenting for consideration. Not as housekeeper, or not only as that. I'd like... He stopped. He was not a man who found these words easily, and she could see him working for them. I'd like you to stay as something more permanent, if that's something you'd want. She looked at the pale horizon. She had told herself since the 2nd week that she was not going to allow herself to feel something about Silas Crow. She had told herself this with the same firmness she applied to most things. Get up early, do the work, don't make more of a situation than it is. She was a housekeeper on a 3-month arrangement. He was her employer and a widower and a man in the middle of a serious fight for his land. Feeling something was a complication nobody needed. She had not been entirely successful. You should know something, she said. All right. I have been very deliberately not thinking about this, she said, for most of 2 months because I thought it would complicate things and because I wasn't sure it was real or whether I was just... She stopped. When you've been lonely for a long time, you can mistake gratitude for something else, or warmth, or just the relief of being somewhere that feels like home. And, he said, and I'm still not entirely sure, she said. I want to be honest about that. I'm not the kind of person who says things I'm not sure of. I know that about you, he said. But I also know, she said, more slowly, that I haven't wanted to leave. Not since the 3rd day. And I've tried to talk myself out of it, and I can't. That's the truest thing I can tell you. He was quiet for a while. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, which was something he did when he was thinking. I'm not easy, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the man who was easy even when Clara was alive, and she knew me better than anyone. I work too much. I go quiet when I should talk. He paused. I have been told I love a piece of land more than I love most people. Who told you that? Clara, he said, more than once. Was she right? He thought about it honestly. For a long time, yes, he said. I think that's changed. I think I lost her, and then I lost the ability to tell the difference between keeping myself going and actually living, and those are not the same thing, and I've been pretending they are for 4 years. He looked at the horizon. You walk into a house and you see what's there, not what you want to be there, what's actually there. He paused. I've needed someone like that for a long time. I'm not a solution to your problems, Silas, she said, not unkindly. I know that, he said. I'm not looking for a solution. I'm looking for, he looked for the word, a partner. In the actual sense, someone who works alongside, not behind. She looked at him. He looked back. Let me think, she said. Take all the time you need, he said. She thought. She thought about it for 10 days, which was not a long time in the abstract and felt like an eternity in the specific, because the question was always there under the surface of the daily work. In the kitchen, in the garden, at the table with the ledger, in the barn where she went sometimes in the evenings to check on the roan gelding she had half adopted by this point. She thought about Edmund, who had been a different kind of man, quieter, softer in the ways that Silas was hard, and whether thinking about Silas meant she was betraying something. She decided after a few days that it didn't. Edmund was gone. What he'd wanted for her in the last year when they both knew time was short was not that she spend the rest of her life in a boarding house. She knew that. She thought about the station platform. Walter Grayson's eyes running over her like a man checking livestock for defects. The sound of his voice saying older woman as if age were a disease he was afraid of catching. She thought about standing there after he left with her suitcase and nowhere to go, and the cold coming in. She thought about what Silas had said. You crossed half this country because a man gave you his word. That makes you brave, not foolish. She thought about all the women who came west and were never told that, who went back east carrying the thing Walter Grayson had said and never set it down. On the 10th day, Pete came back from Helena. He arrived at noon, rode dirty and hungry, and he had a letter from a lawyer named Arthur Crane who had been highly recommended by Martin Vasquez and who had, upon reviewing the materials Pete had brought, responded with what Evelyn could only describe as professional outrage. Crane's letter was 3 pages and precise, and its essence was, the procedural irregularity Mrs. Hargrove had flagged in September had been received by the Land Commissioner's office and had not yet been resolved, which meant Bellamy's legal challenge was currently in a state of suspension. That Crane had personally reviewed the original survey deeds from 1874 and found them entirely in order, and that with the incident documentation Evelyn had compiled, he was prepared to file a counter-response that would, in his professional estimation, effectively end Bellamy's challenge before it reached any formal hearing. He also wrote that he wanted to speak with the witnesses personally, and that he would be in Red Hollow within the fortnight. Evelyn read the letter twice at the kitchen table and then handed it to Silas. He read it once and set it down. Hargrove flagged it in September, he said. She told me in October, Evelyn said. She couldn't say it officially, but she said it. You knew this was already in motion, he said. I suspected it, she said. I wasn't certain until now. He looked at her. You could have told me, he said. Not angry, but something. I could have told you a suspicion that might have come to nothing, she said. I didn't want to give you something to hope for that might not be real. I'd rather tell you something true when I know it is. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the nod of a man who understands the logic even if his first instinct pushed against it. All right, he said. Crane is good, she said. Vasquez wouldn't have sent him otherwise. And with the ledger and the witnesses, Bellamy is going to look at what's in front of him and make a calculation. He'll drop the legal challenge, Silas said. I think so, she said. The harassment, the fires, the fence cuts, that's harder to stop because it's harder to prove definitively. But if the legal strategy fails, a lot of his leverage goes with it. He won't give up entirely, Silas said. No, she said. Men like him don't. But there's a difference between a man applying pressure and a man who's been told, legally and publicly, that the pressure isn't working. He'll recalculate. She paused. And the letter from Crane, once it's filed, it becomes a matter of public record. August Cole will know. Mrs. Hargrove will know. The whole county will know that Bellamy manufactured a legal problem and got his hand slapped for it. That costs him something. In a place this small, reputation costs. Silas read the letter again. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, without looking up from the letter, "Have you thought about what I said?" On the porch. She had been expecting this and had prepared no clean way to say what she wanted to say, which meant she was going to say it the way she said most things, plainly. "Yes," she said. He looked up. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid," she said. "I was married for 22 years and I lost him, and I spent 6 years trying to find something worth getting up for, and it kept not being enough. And I came out here for the wrong reasons and found—" She stopped. "Found something I wasn't looking for, which is usually how the real things arrive, in my experience." "Evelyn, let me finish," she said. He let her finish. "You're not easy," she said. "You told me that yourself, and I believe you, and I want to be clear that I have no illusions about the fact that living alongside a man like you would be complicated. You go quiet when you should talk. You love this land more than most people. You have spent 4 years building a wall around yourself, one stone at a time." She held his look. "And I am a 56-year-old woman who arrived here with a suitcase and the last of her hope, and who has spent 8 weeks rebuilding a kitchen and a household and a ledger full of evidence and a network of allies in a town I'd never set foot in before November." She paused. "I am not fragile, and I don't need easy. I need real." He was very still. "Is this real?" she said. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Then yes," she said. "I'll stay." He exhaled, not dramatically, just the long, honest exhale of a man who has been holding something and has finally set it down. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at her. "You're sure," he said. "I told you," she said. "I don't say things I'm not sure of." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." Outside, the afternoon light had shifted. That particular late winter light that comes in low and warm, even when the air is cold, hitting the window glass and laying a stripe of gold across the kitchen floor. Evelyn noticed it without intending to. The floor she had scrubbed on her hands and knees in the first week, the pale pine boards that had been buried under a year of grime, catching the light now and doing something useful with it. That was the thing about buried things, she thought. They didn't disappear. They just waited for someone to find them. Holt appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the letter on the table and at Silas and at Evelyn, and whatever he saw in the room made him pause. "Everything all right?" he said. "Crane's coming in 2 weeks," Silas said. "Get the men together before supper. I want to tell them myself." Holt looked from Silas to Evelyn. He was a perceptive man, which she had known from the first week, and she could see him reading the room with the accuracy of someone who has worked alongside a person long enough to know their baseline and notice when it's shifted. He looked at her for a moment. Then something in his face, in the careful, weathered, not easily given face of a man who had been holding this ranch together through absence and difficulty for years, something in it eased. "Yes, sir," he said to Silas. And then to Evelyn, "Supper smells good." "It'll be ready at 6, she said. He nodded. He went back out into the yard, and she heard him call to Dutch across the cold air. And then the ordinary sounds of a working ranch resumed around them. Horses, wind, the distant sound of the cattle Silas had spent 20 years building into something worth fighting for. Silas stood up. He picked up Crane's letter and folded it carefully. He looked at Evelyn with the look she had learned to read. Not the rancher's look, not the problem-solving look, but the underneath one, the one that was older and truer and had spent 4 years with not enough room to breathe. "Thank you," he said. "For which part?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "All of it," he said. "Every part of it." She picked up the coffee cups and took them to the basin, and the day continued the way days do, without ceremony, into what would come next. Arthur Crane arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks to the day after Pete had ridden to Helena with the letter. He was not what Evelyn had pictured. She had imagined a lawyer from Helena would look like authority, pressed suit, soft hands, the particular confidence of a man who spent his life in rooms rather than on land. Crane was 40-something with a road-worn coat and ink-stained fingers, and the kind of face that had listened to a great many people describe their problems and had learned to do so without telegraphing what he thought until he was ready to say it. He shook Silas's hand and then Evelyn's, and when he shook hers, he held it a moment longer than formality required. "You compiled the incident ledger," he said. "I did," she said. "I read it 3 times on the ride down," he said. "It's the clearest documentation of a harassment pattern I've seen in 15 years of land disputes. You organized it well." "I had good witnesses," she said. "You had 8 men who'd seen things happen and hadn't written any of it down until someone asked them to," he said. "That's not the witnesses, that's you." She put coffee in front of him and let him get to work. Crane spent the first day with Silas going through the original deed papers from 1874, the survey documents, and the correspondence from Bellamy's lawyer. Evelyn sat in the kitchen and listened through the open office door without pretending she wasn't listening. She heard Crane use the word manufactured twice and the phrase procedurally defective once, and she heard Silas's voice go from the tightly controlled tone he used when he was managing anger to something that sounded by late afternoon like cautious relief. At supper, Crane ate with the men and talked more than she expected. He asked Dutch about the fence cuts with the specific interest of a man building a mental map, asked Holt about the timeline of the hay barn fires, asked Pete about the night of the second fire and what direction the riders had gone. He wrote in a small notebook while they talked. The men answered him with the straightforward accuracy of people who had spent 2 months giving Evelyn accounts of the same events and had gotten used to the discipline of saying what they saw rather than what they assumed. After supper, Crane sat at the kitchen table with Evelyn while Silas went out to check the horses. "Tell me about Bellamy's visit," Crane said. "The one in person," she told him. She told him what Bellamy had said and how he'd said it and what she had seen in his face when Silas refused, the way the easy smile went away and became something more careful. She told him about the look Bellamy had directed toward the garden, toward her. "He mentioned the new faces," she said. "He said it like an observation. It wasn't." Crane looked at her. "He was noting that Crow had reinforced his position," he said. "People around him. Allies." "That's what I thought," she said. "Did it worry you?" She thought about it honestly. "It told me we were doing the right thing," she said. "When a man like that starts noticing what you're building, it means what you're building is working." Crane wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Hartwell, how long have you been here?" 10 weeks, she said. He looked at her for a moment. "In 10 weeks, you compiled a legally usable incident log, established a witness network in Red Hollow, identified the procedural flag on the land office filing, and got a letter to my office that contained enough organized information for me to build a counter-response without a preliminary investigation." He said this the way he said everything, without drama, just as a set of facts being assessed. "Most ranchers I work for have been dealing with disputes for years before they think to do any of that. Most ranchers haven't lost a property to a paper problem before," she said. "I have. You learn." "All the same," he said. Silas came back in from outside. He looked at the two of them at the table and then at Crane's notebook. "Are we ready?" he said. "I'll file the counter-response on Friday," Crane said. "I want the witness statement signed before I go. I'll need each man to put his name to what he told me tonight, and I'll want Mrs. Hartwell's signature on the ledger as the compiler." He paused. "The procedural defect in Bellamy's filing is substantial. The Land Commissioner's office has already flagged it internally. I spoke with the Commissioner's clerk in Helena before I came down, and the flag has been escalating since October. What my response does is formalize what they already suspect, that the survey question was manufactured, that the filing was made in bad faith, and that there is a documented pattern of physical harassment intended to coerce a land sale." Silas stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hand. "What does that mean for Bellamy?" "It means his legal challenge fails," Crane said. It means the land commissioner's office will almost certainly add his name to a list of parties flagged for bad faith filings, which limits his ability to use the same tactic elsewhere. He paused. It means, practically speaking, that he loses the paper war. The physical harassment, the fence cuts, the fires, is harder to prosecute directly without someone willing to testify they were ordered to do it. But a man who's just lost a public legal battle with a finding of bad faith tends to become more cautious about what he does next. Tends to, Silas said. Tends to, Crane confirmed. I won't tell you he becomes a reasonable person. Men like Garth Bellamy don't become reasonable. They become more careful. He looked at Silas steadily. Which means you don't stop documenting. You continue what Mrs. Hartwell started. Every incident, every witness, every date. If he acts again, you have a record that's already been cited in a formal proceeding. That changes the calculus for him significantly. Silas nodded. He was quiet for a moment. And the east pasture, he said. It's clear. It was always clear, Crane said. We're just making the clarity official. Evelyn watched Silas take that in. She watched the thing that happened in his face. Not dramatic, not visible to someone who hadn't spent 10 weeks learning to read him, but real. The weight of 2 years and 2 barn fires and 3 fence cuts and 100 sleepless nights settling out of him by degrees, the way sediment settles in water when the current finally stops. He looked at her. She looked back. I'll put the kettle on, she said. Crane got his signatures the following morning. He went man by man through the ranch hands with the ledger and his notary stamp, and each man signed his name to his own account with the particular gravity of someone who understands they are doing something that matters. Dutch signed last and handed the ledger back to Evelyn. Good ledger, he said. Good witnesses, she said. He made a sound that from Dutch counted as effusive and went back to work. Crane left on Thursday. He shook Silas's hand at the wagon. You'll hear from me within the month, he said. Possibly sooner. He looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Hartwell. It was a genuine pleasure. Come back when it's resolved, she said. I'll make a proper meal. I'll hold you to that, he said. He drove out, and Silas stood in the yard and watched him go, and Evelyn stood beside him the way she had been standing beside him for 10 weeks now, close enough to be present, far enough to leave him room to be himself. How do you feel? She said. Like I've been underwater for 2 years and someone just pulled me up, he said. That's a reasonable description, she said. He looked at her. I want to show you something, he said. This afternoon, if you can spare the time. I can spare the time, she said. He took her on horseback, the roan gelding for her, which she'd been riding occasionally now, and his own bay for him, up the east ridge above the ranch. She had not been up there before. The trail was steep enough that they went single file, and she didn't try to talk, just leaned into the horse's movement and watched where they were going. The top of the ridge opened onto a view that stopped her. The valley spread out below and to the south, the full breadth of it. The Crow Ranch in its center with the house and barn and outbuildings laid out like a map of everything she'd been living inside for 10 weeks. The river was a silver line to the north. The mountains were enormous and close, and the sky above them was the deep blue she'd seen from the train window when she arrived. That blue that didn't exist back east. She sat on the roan and looked at it for a long time. I come up here when things get bad, Silas said beside her, when I need to remember what I'm holding. I can see why, she said. Clara used to say the view made the problems smaller, he said. I always thought that was sentimental. I'm a practical man. The problems aren't smaller because of a view. But, she said. But they're the right size, he said. Up here I can see how big they are and how big everything else is at the same time. That's different from smaller. She looked at him. He was looking at the valley. That's not as unsentimental as you think it is, she said. He looked at her. No? No, she said. That's exactly what people mean when they say a view makes things smaller. They don't mean the problems shrink. They mean they can finally see the proportion. She looked back at the valley. You've always understood it. You just had a different word for it. He was quiet. The horses moved slightly, adjusting their weight, breathing the cold air. I want to build something up here, he said. A porch, just a simple structure, overlooked the valley. I've been thinking about it for years. He paused. I'd like to build it now. She understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. Then build it, she said. He looked at her directly. I'd like to build it for us, he said. If that's... I want to be clear about what I mean. Not the house. The house is full of things I'll carry regardless. But this, up here, this could be something that's just ours, without history in it. She thought about Edmund's photograph on the washstand. She thought about Clara's kitchen garden, which she had coaxed back to life. She thought about all the ways two people carried the people they had loved before, and whether that was a weight or a foundation, and she had decided somewhere in the past 10 weeks that it was a foundation. That you didn't build on empty ground. You built on everything that had come before, because that was the only ground there was. Yes, she said. Build it. He nodded once, the way he nodded when something was decided. Then he looked at the valley again. I'd like to get married in the spring, he said. If that's... I want to ask you properly. On the ground, not on a horse. You can ask me on a horse, she said. He looked at her. There it was. Not quite a smile, but the full version of the thing that had been the cousin of a smile for 10 weeks. It changed his face. She hadn't seen it before, not fully, and it was worth the 10 weeks of the almost version. Will you marry me? He said. Evelyn Hartwell. Will you stay? I already said I'd stay, she said. That was staying, he said. This is different. She looked at the valley. She thought about the station platform in November, the cold, the suitcase. Walter Grayson's voice saying older woman without apology. She thought about how a person could travel halfway across the country chasing the wrong thing and find the right thing in the place where the wrong thing abandoned her. She thought that there was no clean lesson in that, no tidy moral. Life wasn't like that. It didn't arrange itself into lessons. It just kept going, and occasionally, if you stayed on your feet long enough, it handed you something real. Yes, she said. They were married in the spring, the second week of April, when the ground had softened in Clara's kitchen garden, Evelyn's kitchen garden now, in the way that things become yours when you tend them long enough, had the first green showing through the turned soil. The ceremony was in Red Hollow, at the courthouse, because neither of them wanted anything elaborate. Mrs. Hargrove, who had become something like a friend over the winter months of the Bellamy business, served as a witness. Martin Vasquez came with his wife and his oldest son. August Cole came and brought his wife and an awkward but genuine warmth that Evelyn appreciated. Holt and Dutch and Pete stood in the back of the small room in their good shirts and their uncertainty about what to do with their hands, and Evelyn looked at them before the ceremony started and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt she was surrounded by people she had earned, not people assigned to her by birth or circumstance, people who had come to trust her by watching what she did when things were difficult, and who had decided on that basis that she was someone worth showing up for. That was a different thing from belonging to a place because you'd always been there. It was harder to build, and it meant more. The ceremony was short. Silas said what he had to say in the plain, considered way he said everything that mattered, and Evelyn said what she had to say in the same manner, and then it was done. And Holt started to applaud, and Pete joined in, and Dutch made the sound he made, which was equivalent to applause, and that was the ceremony. Silas looked at her. All right, he said. Yes, she said. Crane's formal response had been filed in February. The land commissioner's ruling came in March, 3 weeks before the wedding, and it was what Crane had predicted. Bellamy's challenge was dismissed on procedural grounds, with a notation of bad faith conduct attached to the filing. The East Pasture title was confirmed as clean. Silas had read the ruling at the kitchen table and then folded it and put it in the strongbox with the original deeds from 1874, and he hadn't said much about it, which was how she knew it had hit him harder than he wanted to show. She had let him be quiet about it. Some things didn't need to be processed out loud. Bellamy did not disappear. Men like him rarely did, and she had been honest with herself about that from the beginning. He was still east of them, still running his operation, still a man who had tried to take something that didn't belong to him and been told publicly that he couldn't. What changed was the way he operated. The fence line held through February and March without a cut. The hay barn, the third one, rebuilt again by the men in January, stood. There were 2 incidents in February that went into the ledger. A water trough on the east pasture found broken, a gate found open in a way that was possibly careless and possibly not, but nothing like the fires, nothing that crossed into what a court would call clear. Holt said, one evening in March, "He's waiting." "For what?" Pete said. "To see if the new situation changes things," Holt said. He meant the wedding, which had been announced in Red Hollow by then. A man like Bellamy recalculates when something changes. He's figuring out what it means. "It means we have more people," Dutch said. This was, by Dutch's standards, a speech. He was not wrong. What Evelyn had built over the winter, the network of relationships in Red Hollow, the signed witness accounts, the ledger that now had 7 months of continuous documentation, was not a wall exactly. It was more like a community that had become aware of itself. August Cole talked about the Crow Ranch with the investment of someone who had put his name on something. Martin Vasquez had, in February, organized 3 of his neighboring ranchers to establish a mutual agreement about fence line monitoring. They would watch each other's boundaries and report anything irregular. It had begun as something to support Silas and had become, almost without anyone planning it, a small coalition of people who had decided that what Bellamy was doing was bad for all of them. Evelyn hadn't engineered that. She had started a conversation in a general store in November, and the conversation had continued without her, which was what conversations did when they were about something true. By summer, the ranch had recovered from the winter's damage in the practical sense. The 3rd hay barn was sound, the cattle numbers were back where they needed to be, the east pasture was running well, but it had also recovered in a different sense that was harder to quantify. The men who worked there felt it. Pete stopped talking about Illinois as often. Dutch started taking Sunday evenings on the porch with a cup of coffee, which was new. Before, he had always gone directly to his bunk. Holt looked less like a man carrying a weight alone. Evelyn noticed all of this the way she noticed most things, without announcing it. One evening in June, she was in the kitchen garden when Silas came out from the barn and stopped at the garden fence and watched her work. She had her hands in the soil and her back was complaining about it, and she didn't try to pretend otherwise. She straightened up and put one hand at the small of her back and looked at him. "You're going to tell me to rest," she said. "I was going to offer to help," he said. "Do you know anything about kitchen gardens?" "No," he said. "Then you can watch," she said, and went back to work. He leaned on the fence. The evening light was the long summer kind, lasting and golden, the kind that made the valley look like something painted. She could hear the cattle in the south pasture and the sound of Pete singing something off-key in the barn, which he did when he thought no one could hear. "Crane wrote," Silas said. She looked up. "Bellamy filed an appeal in April," he said. "It was dismissed last week. Crane says the commissioner's office has formally closed the case and that Bellamy's attorney wrote to say he would not be pursuing any further legal action on the East Pasture question." She looked at him. "It's done," he said. "Legally. On paper. Finished." She stayed where she was, kneeling in the garden with her hands dirty, and she felt something move through her that wasn't triumph. Triumph was too clean for what it actually was. It was more like the release of a breath you'd forgotten you were holding. The case had been going the right way for months. She had known, practically speaking, that it was over. But knowing something practically and having it be finally, officially, legally over were 2 different things, and the difference between them had weight. "Good," she said. "That's all?" he said. "What else is there to say?" she said. "We did the work. It went the way it should. That's how it's supposed to work." He looked at her with the direct look. "Most people would be more satisfied than that." "I'm satisfied," she said. "I'm just not surprised. I've never seen a careful record fail a true case in front of a fair court. What I've seen is cases lost because nobody wrote anything down." She brushed the dirt from her hands. "We wrote things down." He was quiet for a moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "What?" "That day on the station platform," he said. "If I'd been 5 minutes later coming out of the station house, if I hadn't been there to see what Grayson did." He paused. "If you'd taken the ticket back east." She looked at him. "I wasn't going to take the ticket back east." "You might have," he said. "Eventually. If no one, Silas, she said, I had nowhere to go back to. I would have stayed in Red Hollow regardless. I would have found something. She said this honestly, not to comfort him, but because it was true. I was not a woman with options. I was a woman with a suitcase and a practical nature. I would have made something work. He looked at her. I believe that, he said. I also believe what I did mattered. It mattered enormously, she said. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm saying you didn't rescue me. You saw me. That's different. He thought about that. What's the difference? Rescue is about the person doing it, she said. Seeing is about the person being seen. He was quiet for a long while. The evening moved around them, unhurried. Pete's off-key singing drifted out of the barn and dissolved into the warm air. I need to tell you something, Silas said. She waited. I am a better man than I was a year ago, he said. I don't say that. I'm not saying it to tell you what you've done. I'm saying it because I want you to know I know it. He looked at his hands on the fence rail. I had stopped thinking a person could change at my age. I thought you became what you were, and the rest was just maintenance. Getting through. He paused. I was wrong about that. She looked at him for a long moment. You weren't wrong, she said. You were just waiting for a reason. She stood up fully, with the full complaint of her back and her knees making itself known. People don't change because they should. They change because something comes into their life that makes the change feel worth the difficulty. She held his look. You were always capable of it. You just hadn't been given a reason to try. You think everyone's capable of it, he said. No, she said. Walter Grayson is not capable of it. Garth Bellamy is not capable of it. Some people have gotten so small inside themselves that there's no room. She paused. But you were just alone. Aloneness and smallness look the same from the outside. They're not. He reached across the fence and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. Her hands were dirty. She didn't mention this. They stood in the garden in the evening light, and the valley was enormous around them, and Pete was still singing, and somewhere in the south pasture a cow was making her opinions known, and the kitchen garden was growing under her feet, and it was not perfect. It was not even close to perfect, because nothing real was. But it was hers. In September, Silas finished the porch on the ridge. It was simple, the way he had said. A platform of good lumber with a railing facing south over the valley, accessible by the trail they had ridden together in April. He brought her up on a Sunday afternoon, and she stood on it and looked at the view and said nothing for several minutes. Well, he said. It's right, she said. They sat on the railing and looked at the valley in the September light. Below, the ranch moved in its ordinary rhythms. She could see Holt crossing the yard, could see the smoke from the kitchen where she had left supper slow cooking. The same view she'd seen in April, and different. Everything the same and not the same. I've been thinking, she said. About what? About the woman on the platform, she said. Not me specifically. Women like me. Women who came west for the wrong reasons or the right reasons and got off the train and found not what they expected. She paused. There are more of them than people talk about. There are, he said. Most of them don't have someone who says enough to the crowd, she said. Most of them just stand there and then make the best of what's next. She was quiet. I've been thinking about what I would say to one of them, if I could. What would you say? He said. She looked at the valley. I'd say that what gets taken from you doesn't define what's left, she said. That you are not the sum of your losses, even when it feels that way, even when the losses are so heavy that you can't imagine anything weighing more. She paused. And I'd say that courage doesn't look the way people think it does. It doesn't announce itself. It just gets up in the morning and does the next thing, even when the next thing is small, even when nobody sees it. She looked at her hands, the rough, work-cracked, useful hands of a woman who had spent a lifetime doing things. It looks like this, she said. It just looks like this. Silas looked at her for a long moment. You should say that to people, he said. Not just think it. I'm saying it to you, she said. I mean more people, he said. She looked at him. He was serious. I'm a rancher's wife in Montana, she said. Who am I going to tell? Whoever needs to hear it, he said. That's always been true of you. You don't wait to be asked before you do the thing that needs doing. She looked back at the valley. She thought about August Cole's general store, about Mrs. Hargrove and her tea, about the younger women who had been coming to her over the months with questions, about managing households, about difficult husbands, about the kind of practical, unglamorous problems that didn't have obvious answers and needed someone who had been through enough to think clearly. She had been answering those questions as they came, without naming it as anything. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was, in fact, exactly the right size for a life. Not grand, not celebrated, but useful to the people in front of you, on the days when they needed it. Not saving anyone, just seeing them the way she had once needed to be seen. I already do, she said. He put his arm around her. She leaned into it, not because she needed the support, but because she wanted it, which was different. And the difference was everything. Below them, the ranch moved on in the last of the September light, and the mountains held the sky the way they always had, indifferent and magnificent. And the valley that Silas Crow had spent 20 years building into something worth fighting for was going to be there tomorrow and the day after that, tended now by 2 people instead of 1. The woman who had arrived at Red Hollow Station with a single suitcase and a worn photograph and no clear sense of what came next had found, in the wreckage of the thing she'd traveled for, something she had not thought to look for. Not security, not rescue, not even love, exactly. Though love was in it, the difficult, unromantic, daily choice kind that built itself slowly out of honesty and work and the willingness to see another person clearly and be seen in return. She had found a life that fit her. And she had learned, at 56, in Montana, in a kitchen she had scrubbed on her hands and knees on the 3rd day of a 3-month arrangement that had turned into the rest of her life, that this was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the whole thing. It had always been the whole thing. The age just meant she finally knew it.